There was a really weird moment last week. TED threw one of its speakers under the bus, so we decided to have him on to talk about the experience. It's the second time they've done it, at least, because people at TED are a bunch of virtual signaling lunatics, including some of my friends who go. Coleman Hughes, if you don't know him, is a writer and podcaster. He has a pretty popular podcast called Conversations with Coleman, and he did a talk, which I encourage everybody to watch, and it's titled A Case for Color Blindness. Something weird happened.
So I'll give the short version here. If you want the long version, you can go to the Free Press, where I wrote a big summary of what happened there. Basically, what happened is Chris Anderson invited me to give a TED Talk, and I chose the subject of my upcoming book, which is coming out in February, called The End of Race Politics. And the argument is just essentially colorblindness. This is the idea that you want to treat people without regard to race, both in your personal lives and in our public policy. And wherever we have policies that are meant to collect and help the most disadvantaged, we should preferentially use class as a variable rather than race. That's my talk in a nutshell. So I prepared the talk with the TED team. I got their feedback, edited, curated, etc. Got up there in April, gave the talk. 95% of the people in the audience, it was quite well received. Whether or not they agreed with every point, it was well within the bounds of acceptable discourse. There was a very small minority on stage I could see that was physically upset by my talk.
On stage?
Now, I could see this on stage, in the moment. But I'm talking 5 people in a crowd of almost 2,000. So I expected that because, color blindness is not in vogue today on the left, amongst progressives. It's really the idea non grata. And so I was expecting to field some pushback, and I talked to some critics and so forth. But what happened is what began as just a few people upset began to spiral into a kind of internal staff meltdown at TED. So this group called Black at TED asked to speak with me. I agreed, and then they said, actually, we don't want to talk to you, and they're an employee group at TED. After the conference, Chris emailed me and said, look, I'm getting a lot of blowback here internally. There are people saying we shouldn't release your talk at all. And then over the course of the next month, they came up with a variety of sort of creative solutions about how to release my talk in a way that would appease the woke staffers that really didn't want it to be released at all. And at this point, I had to start kind of sticking up for myself. So first, they wanted to attach a debate to the end of my talk and release it as one video, which I felt would really send the wrong message. It would send the message that this idea can't be heard without the opposing perspective.
Did they tell you what was problematic about your talk? To use a woke term?
Well,
what was the problem with the talk?
Well, there were no factual problems. It passed the fact-checking team. There were no substantive issues with the talk. The problem was that you had the wrong opinion. The staff. It upset the staff. That was the language that was used. It upset certain people in the staff.
Got it. And those people are Black?
Probably most were. I tried to actually have face-to-face conversations with some of these folks. I only got to talk to one woman. So presumably many of them were Black, but possibly not all.
Okay. What do you perceive was the problem with your talk, or what they perceive the problem with your talk is?
So the last day of the TED conference, they have a town hall. People from the audience come and give feedback. The town hall opened with 2 people denouncing my talk back to back. The first said that it was racist and dangerous and irresponsible. And the second guy, who's actually a guy I knew, he said that I was willing to have us slide back into the days of separate but equal, which was totally the opposite of my talk. And I implore anyone to just go online and watch it, go on YouTube, decide for yourself whether these criticisms bear any resemblance to reality. But that was the idea, that the talk is racist, that, I'm some kind of pro Jim Crow person. Is really, really deranged kind of criticisms.
Your talk is up on TED's website and on YouTube, right? But
Correct.
Part of the controversy was that the number of views seemed to be pretty suppressed. Was that discussed with Chris when you talked with him, or do you have a point of view on the suppression of the promotion of the video, even though they put it out there, and how that's affected, how widespread the video has been made available to folks?
Yeah. So in my final call with Chris, he sort of presented this idea about how to release it. And he sold it to me as a way to amplify my talk, which I think was kind of some spin. He was in a tough position, caught between me and his employees. We ultimately decided they would release the talk. And then 2 weeks later, they'd release a debate between myself and this guy, Jamel Bowie, who was a New York Times columnist. So the talk came out on TED's website. The debate came out, and I kind of mentally had forgotten about the whole situation until Tim Urban, who is a popular blogger, who's actually given
he spoke at All In Summit last year. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Tim is great. He's also given the most viewed TED Talk of all time on YouTube. Tim noticed that my talk just had a really absurdly low view count, like an implausibly low view count on TED's website. In mid-August, he tweeted this, and that he believed they were intentionally under promoting my talk. So I checked. Yeah. I checked, and all of the 5 talks surrounding mine, they all had between 450,000 views and 800,000 views. That was the full range. Mine had 73,000. Right, so 16% of the low end of the range of all the talks released around mine. So when that happened, I felt that TED had kind of reneged on its end of our bargain, and that's when Barry Weiss got wind of it, and I went public.
Just to be clear, you're saying that the condition for releasing your TED Talk, the bargain you struck with Chris, was that you would do a debate with someone in a separate video, and that you had to do the debate in order to have your TED Talk released?
Yes.
Wow.
So yeah, that was the end of the negotiation. The beginning of the negotiation was trying to get me to release those things as one video, and I said, hell no. And then next, we're going to release them as separate videos on the same day. I said, hell no, because that dilutes it. And then we agreed on a 2-week separation between the two.
When Donald Trump was elected president in 2016, needless to say, most of the audience of TED was not on that side of the voting block. And what disturbed me the most was that in the 3 years after he was elected, every TED conference had plenty of subjects, plenty of talks, and plenty of conversations about why society is falling apart, why Donald Trump is a key root cause of that, why so much of him and what he stands for and the people behind him are unjust and evil in all these ways. There wasn't a single talk that provided a perspective of why anyone voted for him.
Can we actually talk about that?
Yeah, let's go into the substance. Yeah. What was your take on it, Chamath? Yeah.
I'll just make a statement, which is, I think that your talk was superb. And just to give you my journey, as a kid that grew up as a refugee on welfare, and then to get through every single sort of strata of society, I think when I look back, the biggest thing that I struggled with was always confusing when I felt mistreated. I would always direct it at racism. It would be my sort of safety blanket. And I would always look at other people as doing that. And it was only until I met my wife and spending years and years talking about it, where I was able to disarm this and see that out of 100 interactions, a lot of the time, just people are having a bad day. Some other percentage of the time, people are actually just being very classist. Because racism, it turns out, is like a pretty severe perversion. And it's really crazy when you actually see it play out. And for me, had I had a framework, if I had your talk when I was in my 20s and 30s, I would have spared myself a lot of self-sabotage. Because what that does is when you feel these things and you don't have a framework to interpret it or to tolerate the anxiety, I would internalize that anxiety and I was a less productive person. And so if the goal was for me on behalf of my family or on behalf of people like me to make it, I would have gotten there much faster had I not gotten in my own way. And when I watched your talk, it was incredibly validating for the work that I had done. And I had thought to myself, man, if I had had him, if he had made that for me when I was 20 years old, amazing. I could have done so much more, because when I think about some of the mistakes I made, they were rooted in this specific issue that you touched. So I just want to say thank you.